What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Vanland. 'Tis the season for heaters and vans. We've been getting tons of calls every day, and in our shop we're installing about one Espar heater per day. So I thought it'd be a good time to go over the system with you guys that makes up the Espar diesel heating system for the Sprinter. We're actually going to go over kind of what makes up the system, also how to start it up and use it, along with some of the common problems that you might have with the heater. And then we're going to give you some pro tips, like how to get into the workshop menu if you do have a problem, to kind of figure out what's going on. First off, let's talk about basically what makes up this system, because it's really comprised of a couple different pieces of equipment that work together, and different Espar heaters for different types of vehicles would be put together in kind of a different configuration. So for the Sprinter itself, what you have is the heating unit itself, which is the combustion chamber, the blower, and some of the other control units for the system. That is typically mounted underneath the seat. The second part of the system is like the pump and some of the exterior parts that are mounted underneath the van. And then finally you have the control unit, which is inside the van, also acts as the thermostat. So basically those three pieces together make up the system that provides the heat to your vehicle from the diesel tank. First, let's take a look at the main component that really requires the most time to install, which is the heating unit itself. So this is comprised of basically all of the electronics, along with the actual combustion chamber that the diesel comes into, and the blower unit. These are typically installed underneath the passenger seat in a Sprinter van. And the reason is first of all, it's a metal box, and when you put the heater in, it's pretty much the only thing that's going to fit in there. So it's kind of a nice way to isolate this piece of equipment from the rest of the van. Should it get really hot or something like that, it's not going to be with any of your other equipment. Also, it's just kind of the perfect spot. It fits in there. It's not a really tight fit, so you have a little bit of room to work, but also it takes up the whole space, which otherwise you'd have to find a space for somewhere else in the van. I've definitely seen these installed in other places, like maybe near the wheel well or something like that, but I would say 90% of the time this is the location that it will be installed. And on the back of the seat here, you can actually see the blower, and that's really all you see of the unit once it's installed. That's the location that the hot air is going to blow out from, and it's nice to keep it near the ground, because then as it spreads out across the van, it will rise, as opposed to kind of having it up high where the heat would just not be able to circulate throughout the van. To gain access to the heater, you may have to remove the seat. You certainly do in order to install it. If you open up this little chamber here, you do have access to at least kind of visually inspect it. And the other thing is, we always leave the fuse kind of loose inside here. The fuse is prone to blowing at some point, so it's nice to be able to have easy access to it. And also, if you need to reset the unit, you can pull the fuse out and leave it out for a few seconds and put it back in, and that will kind of do a reset if you're having issues with it. Keep that accessible. We have actually a full install video on this Espar heater. It's a little bit too much to go over in just a short video like this. You can see step by step how to install one of these, kind of the way the professionals do. So take a look at that. If you guys buy one of these and you are kind of unsure about how it all works, we're gonna really lay out the process for you, all the pieces that are required, and all the steps in order so that you can have a successful installation with this. On the underside, coming out of the unit that's installed under the seat, you have an exhaust here and an air intake here. So air flows in through this, and once it's done combusting in the chamber, it flows out. There's a little muffler here, and then the tail end of the exhaust on that side. You also have the power wire coming out, and this powers the 12-volt pump that pumps the fuel, and then finally the actual fuel line coming in. So basically there are 3 holes in the bottom of the Espar unit with an intake and exhaust, and then a fuel line, and then also from the harness this little power line. And you basically just run those up underneath this heat shield over to this area. And you can see the fuel line coming over right here. And then the power wire connects to the back of the pump, and this is the fuel pump right here. This is the fuel line that comes off of the main tank. It's actually an auxiliary fuel line that just has a cap on it, so it's really nice to be able to just pull that cap off and then click in this connector. And that supplies the pump. Something to mention here is a lot of times people like the exhaust pipe to actually come out all the way over to the driver's side. The kits do not come with enough exhaust hose to get it over there, so if that's something you want, you do actually have to order an extension hose with it. It does make sense because the heaters do put off a bit of exhaust, especially when they're starting up, and it is nice to have it as far away from the sliding door as possible. But just so you know, we run it over here and generally point it forward or down. There's the length of the hose right there. One of the key problems that people have in not being able to start up one of these units has to do with the fuel supply. So basically this is the fuel line. You can see it's clear coming from the diesel tank. And the pump just clicks, 12 volts, clicks back and forth and pumps it across there into the unit. But if you're not getting a good fuel supply, then you basically will have issues where the heater will try to start up and then it will shut down. And it will do that repeatedly, and then it will throw an error code that you have to clear. So it can be a big problem, and it's also a common problem. So the tip is to make sure that you're getting a good fuel supply through this line. And then also that this pump is turned at an angle pointing up. So from the fuel supply side to the heater side, it should be at a bit of an upward angle. I think 15 to 30 degrees is about right. I'm actually going to move this one over a little more. There we go. Okay. So keeping that little bit of an angle should keep the pump primed all the time. And then when you start up the unit, it will flow the first time and not shut down. The third part of the system is actually the controller. The controller X is the thermostat, and then also obviously the control unit to turn it on and off. This unit was just installed yesterday, and I'm actually not sure if it's been started up or not, so let's start it up and see what it does. If you've installed one of these, you should know, first of all, they don't always start up on the first try. How you operate this is when you turn it on, you'll see the heater button flashing. If you use the dial, you can move over to the fan or the settings, but if you just want to start the unit up, turn it to heater, press the button, and then you want to set the temperature that you want the interior to be. So let's just turn it up to 78 to make sure it starts up. Press it again, and then you're going to set the amount of time that you want the heater to run. So the default is 30 minutes, but you can go all the way up to several hours. Let's see if it has, actually infinity, so you can run it forever. So we're just going to go with 10 minutes and then press that. And the dial lights up red, and it should be starting up now. The first thing you'll hear when you start this up is the fan starting to run. And actually, if I come down here and I put my hand on it, I can feel a small draft coming out. That's telling me it's started. And then the next thing to listen for is the sound of the pump clicking. And it's a little bit hard to hear. You'll know it when you hear it, but that is basically the pump starting to send fuel to the unit. And the glow plug at this time is also heating up. So basically, if there's a fuel supply and the glow plug is hot enough, then this will totally kick on. If you're starting up and it's been cold for a while, it might take a few minutes, like 2 to 4 minutes for it to start up. If you've been running it recently, it starts up a lot faster. Let's just give it a few minutes and see what happens. Like I said, these don't always start on the first try because there needs to be fuel in the line from the tank all the way up to the heater unit. So if there's not, then it will shut down and you have to restart it until it brings enough fuel over. I'm actually gonna go down there and see if I can see the pump pumping the fuel over. So I'm gonna go underneath. Okay, I'm here underneath and I can already start to smell it. There is a significant amount of heat coming out of here. And if we look at the pump, you can actually see it clicking. You can feel it. And then if there were any bubbles, you would see them in the fuel line here. I don't see any bubbles. And this thing is really starting to fire up over here. And yes, there it is. The hot air is coming out. All right, so it actually started up on the first time. Somebody may have started it before me, I'm not sure, but this one is working perfectly. We've got a massive amount of hot air coming out here. I mean, it gets really hot. These heaters can keep up with almost any cold weather that you can throw at them. If your van is well insulated, this just puts out so much heat, and if it keeps cranking for an hour or more, this is a really hot space. The nice thing about the Espar is that it's temperature controlled, so it will obviously scale down to a much more tame setting once it's gotten up to temperature. And actually it's a bit loud right now when you first turn it on. You can definitely hear it. It sounds like a little jet engine running. But once it has heated up, it goes down to noise level that isn't really even that perceptible, and certainly it wouldn't keep you up at night, or at least it doesn't for me. Let me run over and get my temperature gauge so we can see how hot the air is. Here we go. Let's see. Just turned it on a couple minutes ago, and the temperature of the air is basically 160 degrees. So that's basically sauna temperature, 160 to 180. These are really great because, you know, if you're coming in from skiing and you have boots that you want to dry or gloves, you can set it around here. It doesn't get so hot that you'd have to worry about something melting, at least I don't think. I mean, give some distance away from it. But, you know, all night, if you had something that was wet, you could set it there. I've done it before with like towels that I've used, and it will dry it to a crisp because it's just such a powerful little heater. I've actually seen some people dry their hair, take an outdoor shower, turn this on. You can kind of lean over it, get a good hair dry. It works. It's dry, see? Oh, now it's like at 170 back in there. Anyways, it's hot. It's hot air. In general, I would say that these Espar heaters are very reliable. That is, once you get them started up. I do see people have issues getting them started up. It does seem like with the new S2D2 and the wiring that goes with it and all the components that come with the kit, at least the one that we sell, it is very reliable. It's pretty much plug and play with a couple little wiring connections that you have to make yourself. But otherwise, once you get it going, it's a very reliable heater. You can actually just kind of leave it running all day if you're camping and kind of in and out of it. And if the temperature gets too low, it'll just turn on. And so it's just a great way to keep the inside of your van really cozy. A couple more things about the heater control. So I showed you how to turn it on, but just so you know, this is also the thermostat. So this is what's reading the temperature. And as of right now, we kind of just have it in this general area. Even though this van is being built out, it will ultimately go somewhere else. But my opinion is that you want it somewhere not too close to the ceiling, but also definitely not near the floor or back into the front of the vehicle, because this area gets really cold. It's really better if you have it somewhere behind the driver's seats. So this is a common spot, somewhere on this shelf or anywhere up in this area tends to be really good. If you put it all the way back near where the bed would typically be at the back of the vehicle, then actually it takes a long time for this to read the temperature, and generally it's going to probably overheat the vehicle. So I've had good results with it being basically up in this general area. If you want to, you can also buy a remote thermostat for this, which basically just plugs in, and then you can run that some distance away For a larger van, that might be something you'd use, but generally this does the trick. I wanted to share with you guys basically the 3 most common issues that we see with the Espar heater. The first and foremost would be the fuel supply. You really have to make sure that the fuel lines are done correctly and that there's nowhere for air to enter them, because if you get bubbles, then ultimately the heater's going to shut down and give you error codes. So it's actually not that difficult. You just have to make sure that when you do the fuel supply, all the connections are tight, but not so tight that the rubber hoses get crimped and you can't get a fuel supply through. The second issue we see is with the blower itself, and this is due to some type of obstruction, either with the air coming in or the exhaust air going out, or the blower air. So basically, if you set something up against the blower and it feels resistance with the air going out, it's probably going to shut down and throw a code. So you have to think that these little Espar heaters are actually little combustion chambers, and the safety is paramount, so it does seem like the units will shut down prior to having any issues. So airflow, if you're blocking the actual blower outlet, it will give a code. The other way you could get a problem with the airflow is the intake underneath and also the exhaust. So if either of those are blocked or experiencing resistance, let's say for example, the exhaust hose got bent and crimped because you rode over a rock or a stick or something like that, and if it wasn't able to exhaust, it would simply shut down and give you an error code. On a recent job, we actually had a heater and we started it up and it was working perfectly, but we kept getting an error code that I had never seen before. And after digging around into the unit and kind of pulling things apart, we found a very tiny leaf that was caught in the blower motor, a leaf that you could kind of crumble with your fingers, but the blower and the fan are sensitive enough that they picked up that there was a little bit of resistance in there, and it basically just shut down. And then the third thing is actually a problem that you would get down the road after you've had the unit for 6 months or a year or a couple years, and that's actually the filter getting clogged. So there's a fuel filter in here. With the diesel fuel, it can over time start to clog up, and then the fuel supply is not going to be adequate to run the unit. And that is actually a problem that can sometimes be caused by shutting down the unit mid-cycle. So even after you turn off your heater, it still runs for a while to basically dissipate all the heat and to clear the fuel lines and things like that. So if you shut down mid-cycle, you're probably causing that problem to be worse than it would be otherwise. So that's one of the tips, is just to make sure that when you turn it off, you run the full cycle out, and don't unplug your batteries or shut them off when the heater is running if possible. We wanted to share a couple pro tips with you guys on these units so that you can feel like you're doing everything you can to maintain it yourself and not have error codes come up when you really need some heat instead. So the first would be actually the power supply. So in a van that is not getting built out or that the heater is installed early on in the build, a lot of times people will power these off of the starter battery, whether they're getting the terminal underneath the driver's seat or going directly to the battery. There's some problems with that, namely if you have the heater running all night off of your starter battery, you don't want to wake up in the morning and not be able to start your vehicle. The other option, which is to connect to the auxiliary power terminal that's underneath the driver's seat. On most vans these days, that power supply actually cuts off after, I believe it's like 30 to 45 minutes. Haven't timed it exactly, but definitely that power terminal will turn off. So you would actually have to push the start button on the vehicle again to bring power back to it so that you could run it for another 30 to 45 minutes. So if you plan to run it all night, then the best thing to do is to actually power the unit off of your auxiliary power system. If you are going to go direct to the battery, you just have to be really careful because, like I said, you do not want the battery to be dead in the morning. You'll be warm, but you will be stuck, and that's too bad. And the third pro tip, we showed you guys where we put access to the fuse for this unit. If you do need to restart the unit, then pulling the fuse and cutting all power, I found is actually the best way to reset it, because if you just turn it off on the controller, you're really not resetting it at all, and if you have an error code, it's not going to try again to start the system. So when you install the unit under the seat, make sure you leave that fuse accessible, or you could run it to somewhere on the outside of the seat base so that you always know where it is, but basically just don't bury it away so that you can't get to it. All right, and the final pro tip for you guys is actually how to get into the workshop menu. So this little controller has quite a few little menu items on it that you can select, whether, for instance, if you want Fahrenheit or Celsius to display on here, or if you want to program it so that it turns on at a certain time of day and a certain day of the week, you can do that all through the menu. And I'm not going to go over that right now. That will be reserved for the lengthier install video. But what I do want to show you is if you have an error, how to get into the workshop menu. Okay, so how you actually get into the workshop menu is to scroll over to the gear icon. You're going to press this once so that the clock is blinking, and then you're going to hold down the return button for a couple seconds, and bam, you're in. Okay, so from here you can set the language. Most importantly, read the error codes and reset them if you need to. So basically, once you get to scroll over to error memory, press that once. H1 is your actual heating unit, and so if I press that, then I can read and delete codes. So I'm going to read codes right now. It shows me that there's no errors. If there was an error, then basically we would go to delete, and it would delete the codes. You can also go to, in the error memory, you can go to the control unit as well. So you basically have two options, the heater unit codes and the control unit codes. The control unit is this actual device itself, or if you had an external one plugged in. So you press that, and again, you can read and delete the error codes. Okay? A couple other things you can do in here are to look at the hour counter so that you know when your maintenance is coming up, and set a maintenance interval so that you get an alert when you need to do the maintenance on it. And there's a couple other things that you can look at too here, like the control sensor, the indicator sensor, and also update the system. So the workshop menu is just kind of a hidden menu. If you're having an error code and you can't figure out what's going on, you can go actually into that workshop menu, read the code, and it will read something like P0100 or something to that effect. And if you have that code, you can actually get pretty specific about what is going on with the unit. It will tell you which part of the system the error is in, and that will give you a fighting chance to repair it or at least diagnose it if you do have a problem. So just wanted to share that with you guys, and hopefully if you are installing one of these units, you have success with it, and if you don't, then you can solve some of your problems and look after the most common problems so that you always have heat in your van, which is super important. You don't want to be cold and you don't want to be sad. So, so that will happen if you've spent all this money on a heater and it doesn't work when you want it to. I'm going to give you one bonus pro tip. Bonus pro tip is, if you're going to go on a trip and it's going to be cold, start your heater a couple days before. If it's not working, you might have a chance to get it fixed, or at least the peace of mind to know that it is working. And I have one more pro tip, which is, if you can possibly start the heater when it's not so cold. That's the other thing we've heard, and it's actually a problem that I don't know where it's coming from, which is the heater will not start when it's extremely cold. Obviously, this could be like a fuel supply issue because diesel tends to get a little bit thicker when it's cold, or something like that. If you guys have experienced this, or if anyone has actually solved this issue, why will the Espar not turn on in very cold weather, then please leave a comment. Or if you live in a super cold place and your Espar is rock solid and starts every time, leave that as a comment as well, just so we can get some feedback from you guys. All right, thank you guys so much. This has been such a pleasure. It is the season for heaters. We know that you guys want to stay warm inside your van, and this is really the best way to do it. If you need one of these, there's a link in the description, and you can just buy it from the store and we'll ship it right out to you. If you do buy the heater from us, then we include the full-length installation video, like how a professional shop installs this heater and gets it working. Or if you already have your heater and you want to just get the video, there's a link for that below as well. But thank you guys so much. It has been a pleasure to share another Wednesday with you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.